Hello, I'm John Hemingway. Welcome back to Shropshire. Now, today we are talking WORMER resistance, Anthic resistance. You asked for it, so we are doing it. Now, I like to make concise videos, and with the best will in the world, this is a big topic and I cannot do it justice in 6 minutes. So it is going to be a two-parter. Today, part one, we're going to talk about how WORMER resistance develops, the actual mechanics of it. And I will tell you how you can test for the resistance status on your farm. In the second video, next time, we will talk about responsible worming practices, how we can slow the development of resistance to our wormers. And I'll talk about other methods of parasite control that mean we don't have to rely on the anthelmintics at all. So, part one. Stick with me, let's get stuck into it. So the first thing to say about worm control generally is that it's a topic that is always in flux. No 2 years are the same, and what you do one year might not work well for you the following year, or there could have been something that you did better. You know, we have different weather, different humidity, different levels of rainfall and temperature year on year. So we need to constantly be thinking about worm control during the grazing season. What is going on right now? What is the most effective thing that I could be doing at the moment to tackle the worms in my lambs? And it's a good thing to have an ongoing dialogue with your vet about. Now, when we are talking about anthelmintic resistance, wormer resistance, worms in your animals being resistant to the wormers we have available to us, we have to understand that resistance is always present. There is always resistance on your farm. Even the wormers that we sometimes erroneously describe as being zero resistant, you know, like the orange and the purple class, yes, they might be very effective at dropping those worm egg counts and we can rely on them, but when we say they're 100% effective, that's not strictly true. They might be 99.7% effective or something like that, but there will be some worms that have a gene that makes them resistant to those products, and that is an important thing to understand when we're looking at how resistance develops on a farm. So in order to explain how resistance develops in the way that I understand it in my head, I find it easiest to think of these worms as being in two separate locations. You have got the worms that are living in your lambs or in your ewes at any one time, and then you've got the worms that are living on the pasture at the same time. So the ones in your lambs are ones that get exposed to wormer when you treat them. The ones that are on the ground are ones that don't get exposed to wormer. Okay, so let's look at an example, and as an example, these figures are vastly exaggerated for the purpose of explaining the mechanism of resistance, but let's go with it. So on our pasture, we have got, let's say, 10 worms, and we're going to say 10% of them, so one worm, are resistant to the wormer that we're going to use. Now, because these lambs have been grazing on this pasture, the makeup of worms in them is reflective of your pasture. So 10% of the worms in the lamb are also resistant to the wormer. Okay, so what we're going to do is worm the lamb. Now this will of course kill off 90% of the worms that were susceptible to that wormer, and it's going to leave the 10% there. So this lamb is going to look better. Most of its worms have been wiped out, its egg count is going to drop, and the number of eggs that it is shedding will have dropped by 90%. But here's the catch. Of those eggs that it is now shedding, 100% of them are carrying the resistance gene, because all of them came from the worm that survived being treated. Because those eggs are being shed on the pasture, what this is going to do is slightly increase the proportion of larvae on the pasture that are carrying that resistance gene. Hopefully that makes sense. This is really important. So, having treated, the makeup of larvae on the ground has moved slightly in favour of the resistant worms. Now the lambs, of course, will be put back on the pasture, and they're going to be reinfected with those worms. And because their worm makeup is going to be reflective of what they're grazing, we're going to end up with the makeup of worms in the lamb also having a slightly higher proportion of resistant worms to what it had before. I hope that makes sense. Now this is a cycle. Each time that you worm with the same product, this cycle repeats itself, and the level of resistance on your pasture increases slightly. This is a permanent change in one direction, okay? We're giving a selective advantage to the worms that are resistant to those wormers. Once we've got resistance there, we can't do anything to shift it back in the other direction. So let's talk about how to establish what the current status is on your farm, because this is very easy to do. And if you're in England, you can get funding through the Animal Health and Welfare Pathway again this year to do this for free with your vet. Okay, so what you will need to test a particular wormer is 10 lambs, and those lambs need to have worms in them. And the more they've got in them at the start of this test, the better. So what we're going to do is get 10 lambs in a group, and you will mark those individual 10 lambs as you get individual fecal samples from them. And then on that same day, you will worm them with, let's say you use ivermectin. Okay, so you've got fecal samples from 10 specific lambs and you have wormed them. You'll then do a fecal egg count on those samples, so you will know what the level was in those lambs at the start of your trial. All you have to do then is wait for a predetermined period of time and resample those lambs. It has to be exactly the same lambs, that is why you mark them. And you'll do a fecal egg count on the samples from those lambs again, and you'll see what the drop is. Now, if you're doing this for a clear wormer or a white wormer, the period of time over which you resample is 2 weeks. If you're doing it for a yellow wormer, it is 1 week. There's no point going into why that is now, but just take it as read. So if your levels have dropped from 1,000 eggs per gram to 500 eggs per gram, that wormer has been 50% effective. If they've dropped from 1,000 to 100, 90% effective, so on and so forth. Knowing your resistance status is extremely important because it allows you to make informed decisions about how and when you use certain wormers. People might assume that they have resistance to white wormers within the population of worms on their land, and for most people that is true, but not for everybody. On some farms they are still effective, and it's good to know that so that you can use that wormer in your rotation. We will talk about that in the next video. So we have talked about how resistance develops and how to find out what your resistance status is. We're going to leave it there for today, but next time we'll pick up on how to use that information to effectively manage the parasites on your farm. I hope that part 1 was interesting and that it was useful, and I hope you come back for part 2. I'll be along with it in a fortnight, and I do hope to see you there. Bye.